The bucket sloshed against my swollen belly as I pushed it across the obsidian marble floor of Castellano Tower. 3 months pregnant, and every movement felt like an apology my body was making to physics. I'd been scrubbing these floors for 2 weeks now, long enough to know that the executive wing on the 42nd floor came alive after midnight. That's when the real business happened. That's when men in expensive suits said things they shouldn't. When deals were made in shadows. When secrets spilled over whiskey that cost more than my monthly salary. The undercover assignment was supposed to be simple. Slip into housekeeping at Castellano Tower, gather intelligence on Domenico Castellano's operations for the FBI, get out before anyone noticed. My handler, Agent Morrison, had been explicit. In and out. You're 7 months along. This is a desk job in disguise. Observational work only. What he hadn't mentioned was that I'd be pregnant and alone after Marcus abandoned me the moment he found out. What he hadn't said was that every stair felt like climbing a mountain, or that the other cleaning staff would make jokes about the fat janitor, who could barely carry a mop. I was used to being invisible, though. Invisibility was survival in my old life. Before the Bureau recruited me. Before I got involved with the wrong man. Before I realized Marcus worked for the very people I was now supposed to betray. The elevator chimed. It was past 1 a.m. The building should have been empty, except for security. I kept my head down, dragging the wet mop across another section of pristine floor, my lower back screaming in protest. The overhead lights cast everything in sharp relief: the floor, my reflection, the silhouette of whoever had just stepped out of that elevator. Heavy footsteps, deliberate, not rushing. I didn't look up. That was rule 1. Be invisible. Don't stare. Don't make eye contact. Don't exist. But something in the quality of that silence made my skin prickle. The footsteps stopped. Not near me, maybe 20 feet away, but close enough that I could feel the weight of attention, like a spotlight had just found me in the dark. You, the man said, not a question. My fingers tightened on the mop handle. I could feel my baby shift inside me, reacting to the sudden spike in my adrenaline. Easy, I whispered silently to the life I was carrying. Just ignore him. Be nothing. The floor, he continued, his voice dropping lower. You're doing it wrong. I risked a glance up. The man who'd spoken was tall, dangerously so, with dark hair that caught the light like polished obsidian. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe, and his eyes were the color of a winter storm. But it wasn't his appearance that made my breath catch in my throat. It was the way he was looking at me. Not at my mess, not at my stomach, not with the disdain the other executives threw at housekeeping like scraps. He was looking at me like he was trying to read something written in a language he'd forgotten. I'm sorry, I said automatically, my voice small. Playing the part. I can fix it. He walked toward me, and I had to fight every instinct, screaming at me to back away. There was something predatory in his stride, something that made the air feel thinner. Up close, he was worse. Better. Both things at once. You're pregnant, he said. It wasn't an observation. It was an accusation. Yes, I whispered, my hand instinctively moving to cradle my belly, a protective gesture that made something flicker across his face. Something dangerous and vulnerable at the same time. And they have you working nights, scrubbing floors. His jaw tightened. At this hour. In your condition. I should have stayed quiet, should have mumbled an apology and disappeared back into the walls. But something about the way he said it, not with pity, but with something that looked dangerously like anger on my behalf, made me stupid. It's the job, I said. It's honest work. He laughed then. A short, harsh sound with no humor in it. Nothing about this is honest, is it? My heart stopped. Did he know? Had he seen through me? Was this the end of the operation? The moment everything collapsed? But he wasn't looking at me with suspicion. He was looking at me with something that might have been disappointment or concern, both of which were somehow more terrifying than anger. What's your name? He asked. Julia, I said. It wasn't my real name. It was the identity Morrison had built for me, complete with falsified employment records, a backstory, a buried past. Julia, he repeated, and the way he said it felt like a prayer in a language I didn't understand. You shouldn't be here. I need the work, I said, and that part was true. The Bureau's cover income was minimal, and I had medical bills, rent, a baby coming. Not here. He stepped closer, and I had to tilt my head back to meet his eyes. Not in this building. Not with... He glanced at my stomach, and that flash of something vulnerable crossed his face again. Not carrying his child. The words landed like a physical blow. How did you? Because I have eyes, he interrupted. And because you have the look of a woman who's been left behind by someone who didn't deserve her. I couldn't breathe. This wasn't supposed to happen. Random executives weren't supposed to notice me, let alone speak to me like I was a human being, let alone say things that made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in months. I should get back to work, I said, pulling away. His hand caught my wrist, not roughly, but with enough certainty that it was impossible to move. His grip was warm, and beneath the expensive suit I could feel the hard muscle of someone who didn't spend his time at a desk. I'm Domenico, he said quietly. Domenico Castellano. The floor beneath my feet seemed to tilt. I was supposed to gather intelligence on this man. I was supposed to record his conversations, document his movements, betray his trust to federal agents in anonymous parking garages. I was not supposed to touch him. I was definitely not supposed to feel like I'd just stepped into a riptide that was going to pull me under. I know who you are, I whispered. Something shifted in his expression, a hardening, a closing off. But his hand remained on my wrist, and his eyes still held that impossible mix of danger and need. Then you know, he said softly, that you should be terrified of me. He waited, watching my face like he was testing something, testing me. I should have said yes. I should have pulled away, grabbed my bucket, and dissolved back into the invisible world where undercover FBI operatives belonged. Instead, I found myself whispering, I am. His grip tightened for just a moment. Then he released me, stepping back, but his eyes never left mine. Finish your shift, he said. And tomorrow, don't come back to this floor. Stick to the lower levels, away from the business. Why? The word escaped before I could stop it. He turned away, walking back toward the elevator. But just before he stepped inside, he glanced over his shoulder at me. Because I'm trying very hard to be a better man than the world made me, he said. And you, Julia, you make that very, very difficult. The elevator doors closed, leaving me alone on that marble floor. My mop had fallen. My bucket had overturned, sending dirty water spreading across the pristine surface in a dark, chaotic stain that couldn't be contained. And my hands were shaking for reasons that had absolutely nothing to do with fear. I didn't go back to the 42nd floor. For 3 days, I kept to the lower levels bathrooms, break rooms, hallways where the only people who saw me were other invisible staff members. I told myself it was following orders. Domenico had been explicit. Stay away. But that was a lie. The truth was that I was terrified. Not of him, though I should have been. I was terrified of myself. Of the way his voice had sounded saying my name. Of the way my body had responded when his hand was on my wrist. Of the fact that I was supposed to be documenting his crimes. And instead I was remembering the look in his eyes like it was poetry I couldn't quite translate. Morrison had called on the second day. How's the operation? He'd asked, his voice crackling through my earpiece while I was alone in a supply closet. Fine, I'd lied. Nothing significant yet. Mostly observational. Stay focused, Julia. We need conversations, movements, proof of the money laundering we know is happening through the investment accounts. Castellano doesn't leave a digital footprint, everything goes through intermediaries. But if we can place him at the scene of illegal activity, we have leverage. Leverage. The word had tasted like poison. On the 4th night, as I was finishing the 15th floor, the elevator opened. It wasn't him. It was one of his men. I'd learned to recognize them by the way they moved, the expensive watches, the careful distance they kept from everyone around them. This one had a scar that ran from his temple to his jaw, and he was studying me with an intensity that made my protective instincts flare for my baby. You, he said. Julia. My stomach dropped. Yes? Mr. Castellano wants to see you. Every instinct screamed that this was a trap, that Domenico had figured out who I was, what I was doing, and now I was about to walk into a room where I'd be interrogated by the most dangerous man in the city. I'm working, I said, keeping my voice steady. My shift isn't over for another 2 hours. The man, I'd heard someone call him Enzo, smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. Mr. Castellano doesn't care about your shift. He was already walking toward the elevator, gesturing for me to follow. My hand went to my pocket, where the small recording device Morrison had given me sat dormant. Everything I recorded would be evidence. Everything he said to me could be used against him in court. I followed Enzo into the elevator. The ascent felt like descending into hell. The 42nd floor was different at night. The office doors were closed, the lights dimmed to mood lighting that made everything feel intimate and dangerous. Enzo led me down a corridor I hadn't seen before, stopping at a heavy wooden door with no nameplate. He knocked twice and left without a word. The voice that answered was low and authoritative. "Come in." The office was massive, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a desk that probably weighed more than my car, and behind it, Domenico Castellano in shirt sleeves, looking like he'd just walked out of a fever dream. He'd removed his jacket. His white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, and I could see the edge of a tattoo on his collarbone, something in Italian, rendered in elegant script. "Giulia," he said, and hearing my name from him again made something in my chest tighten. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't aware I had a choice." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "You always have a choice." Enzo was just persuasive about which option was preferable. I remained standing, trying to keep my body language defensive. But my hands were shaking, and I knew he could see it. "Why did you ask for me?" Domenico stood, moving around his desk with the kind of grace that shouldn't exist in a man his size. He was tall, maybe 6'3", with the build of someone who'd grown up fighting, not in gymnasiums. "Because I told you to stay off this floor," he said, "and I've been watching the security footage. You've been following my instructions, staying in the lower levels, being obedient." The word hung in the air between us, heavy with implications I wasn't prepared to explore. "I don't want trouble," I said carefully. "I know you don't." He walked closer, and I had to resist the urge to back away. "You're carrying a child. You're alone. You're working a job that's destroying your body. The last thing you want is trouble." I could feel my pulse in my throat. "Then why am I here?" "Because I'm about to create a very big problem," he said softly, "and I need to know first if you're going to run." Before I could respond, he reached out and gently took my hand. His skin was warm, calloused, the grip of someone who'd used his hands for violence and tenderness in equal measure. He placed my palm flat against his chest. His heart was racing. "I know who you are," he said. The world stopped. Every mistake, every lie, every carefully constructed piece of my false identity, it all crumbled in that instant. I could feel the recording device in my pocket like a brand, could feel the betrayal written across my face. Your name isn't Giulia," he continued, his voice steady. "Your identification is fabricated, and the man who abandoned you when he found out you were pregnant works for my cousin Vittorio, who's been trying to move in on my territory for the last 6 months." My hand was still pressed against his chest. I should have pulled away, should have run, should have done 1,000 things except stand there, feeling his heartbeat under my palm. "How did you know?" I whispered. "Because Marcus Rossi came to me 3 weeks ago, panicked, saying his girlfriend had disappeared into a federal safe house, that she'd been recruited, that she knew things about his operations that could be used as leverage." Domenico's hand covered mine, keeping it pressed against him. He was furious when I told him I wouldn't help him retrieve you. I looked up at him, confused. "Why wouldn't you?" "Because," he said, and his eyes were dark, conflicted. "The moment I saw you on that floor, I knew you were the one he'd been looking for. And I made a decision." "What decision?" "To keep you away from him, to protect you." Even though, he paused, his jaw tightening, even though protecting you might mean I'm protecting the FBI's informant against my own interests. The confession hung between us, impossible and real. "You know, I'm working with the government," I said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, and you're not going to turn me in." "No." His hand released mine, but only to cup my face, his thumb brushing my cheekbone with a tenderness that felt like a betrayal of everything he was. "I'm going to do something far more dangerous." "What?" I breathed. "I'm going to make you fall in love with me," he said quietly. "So completely that when the time comes, you'll have to choose between the career you've built and the man you never wanted to love." Before I could process the words, before I could formulate a response, he kissed me. It wasn't violent or aggressive. It was a claiming, a confession, a promise of ruin. His hand stayed gentle against my face, but I could feel the power in him, the absolute control he was exercising by restraint. I should have pulled away. I should have walked out of that office and called Morrison and ended the operation. Instead, I kissed him back. I stopped going to work the next day, not because I was afraid of Domenico, though I should have been. I called in sick with a voice that sounded hollow even to my own ears. Morrison would be suspicious. He'd want to know what happened on the 42nd floor. But I couldn't face him, couldn't sit across from him in some parking garage and explain that I'd kissed my target, that he'd kissed me, that he knew I was there, and instead of killing me, or handing me over to his enemies. He'd made a confession that had shattered every rule of engagement. I couldn't face the fact that I wanted him to find me. By the third day of my absence, he did. The knock came at my apartment door at 2 a.m. I should have been asleep. Instead, I'd been sitting on my worn couch, one hand on my swollen belly, staring at the wall, and trying to convince myself I was doing the right thing by hiding. I opened the door without checking the peephole. Domenico stood in my hallway like a dark god who'd descended into the wrong neighborhood. He wore an all-black suit, tailored to perfection, and he held a paper bag from an Italian bakery that had closed down 5 years ago, except apparently, it hadn't closed for everyone. "You weren't at work," he said without preamble. "I was sick." "You're not sick." He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, closing the door behind him. His gaze swept across my apartment, the second-hand furniture, the stacks of pregnancy books, the absence of anything that suggested a man lived here. "You were hiding." I wrapped my arms around myself. I needed time to think. About what? He set the bakery bag on my kitchen counter, moving through my space like he already owned it, like he owned me. About your duty to the FBI? Your loyalty to a government that sent a pregnant woman to spy on men who would kill her without hesitation? Or about the fact that I kissed you, and you liked it? "Don't," I said sharply. "Don't what?" He turned to face me, and in the dim light of my apartment, he looked less like a mafia boss and more like a man who was genuinely confused by his own choices. "Don't tell you the truth. Don't stand in your home at 2 a.m. because I couldn't sleep knowing you were here alone?" My breath caught. "Domenico, do you know what I did for the last 72 hours? He continued, moving closer. "I had my men monitor your building. I made sure no one from Vittorio's family came near you. I paid your rent 3 months in advance because I watched you stare at an eviction notice like it was a death sentence. And I held myself back from coming here because I knew that if I did, if I saw you in this space that belongs only to you and your child, I would lose control." "You shouldn't have done those things," I whispered. "I know." He reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, his touch gentle. "I'm not a good man, Julia. I've killed people. I've ordered deaths. I've made women cry, and men beg. I've built an empire on blood and betrayal." His hand dropped to rest on my stomach, feeling the slight movement of my baby. "But I'm standing here, and I'm telling you that none of that matters anymore, because you're carrying a child who deserves better than the father who abandoned you. And I'm offering to be that better choice. You can't just offer yourself as some kind of solution," I said. But my voice lacked conviction. "Why not?" His dark eyes held mine. "Because you're working for the FBI? Because you're supposed to betray me? Because on paper I'm your target and you're my spy?" He moved to the kitchen, opening the bakery bag and revealing a collection of Italian pastries, cannoli, sfogliatelle, biscotti. "I don't care about any of that. I care that you're hungry at 2 a.m. and you can't afford the good bakery. I care that you've been sick with worry for 3 days and didn't eat. I care that your feet hurt and your back aches, and you're terrified about bringing a child into a world that hasn't been kind to you." He pulled out one of the cannoli, taking a bite and then holding it to my lips. "Eat." I should have refused. Should have lectured him about manipulation and coercion, and the fact that he was using care as a weapon. But I was hungry, starving. Actually, and he was right. I hadn't eaten in days. I took a bite. The cream was sweet, the shell perfectly crispy. It tasted like memories I didn't have of a grandmother I'd never known, of a home that had never existed for me, of all the things that were supposed to be possible but never were. Tears slid down my cheeks. "Hey," Domenico said softly, setting the pastry down. His hands cupped my face, and he was looking at me like I was something precious and fragile. "What's wrong?" "Everything," I said. "This is wrong. You're wrong. I'm wrong. I came to this job trying to prove I could be good at something, trying to build a life for my baby. And now I'm standing in my apartment eating stolen pastries from a man who kills people. The pastries aren't stolen." He smiled, and it transformed his entire face, erasing the hardness, revealing something younger underneath, something that looked capable of tenderness. "I bought them. Legally. Because I have legitimate business interests too, you know. That's not funny." "No," he agreed, his expression sobering. "It's not. But you need to understand something, Julia. I know what I am. I've made peace with it. But I also know that I'm not the worst thing in your life. Marcus was worse. The system that sent you here, pregnant and alone, with a wire on your body and fear in your heart that was worse. I'm just a man who saw you and decided that for the first time in my life, I wanted to protect something instead of destroy it. He guided me to the couch, settling me against the cushions with the expertise of someone used to handling fragile things. He remained sitting beside me, one arm stretched along the back of the couch, not quite touching but close enough that I could feel his presence like a physical thing. "Tell me about your baby," he said. "What are you hoping for? Boy or girl?" The question was so innocent, so devastatingly human, that I found myself answering without thinking. "Girl," I said. "I want a daughter, someone strong, someone who won't make the mistakes I made." "She will," Domenico said. "Every person makes mistakes. It's how they survive them that matters." He was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice had changed, become rougher, like he was pulling words from a deeper place. "I had a sister, when I was young, younger than you. She was 5. My stomach clenched at the past tense. "What happened to her?" I asked carefully. "Our father was a good man," he continued as if I hadn't spoken. "Better than I am. But he made enemies. One night, they came to our house. They took his daughter, my sister, as leverage. They said they'd return her if he cooperated with their business." Domenico's jaw tightened. He refused. He went to the authorities instead. The next morning, she was found in an alley. "Domenico, I'm so sorry. I was 10 years old," he interrupted, "and I made a decision. I decided I would never be weak like my father was weak. I decided I would become so powerful, so feared, that no one would ever touch what belonged to me." His eyes found mine, and I kept that promise. For 35 years, I've kept it. Until you walked into my building carrying someone else's child, and I realized that my power meant nothing because I had no one to protect it for. He reached out and placed his hand over mine, resting both on my stomach. "This baby," he said quietly, "I'm going to make sure she never knows fear. Not because I want to own her or control her, but because she's yours. And you," he paused, his voice dropping to barely a whisper, "you're mine, whether you choose it or not." I wanted to argue. Wanted to tell him that consent required choice, that love couldn't be demanded or declared unilaterally, but his hand was warm on my belly, and my baby was moving beneath our joined palms, and Domenico Castellano was looking at me with an expression so vulnerable, so raw, that I couldn't quite remember why I was supposed to betray him. "I have to tell Morrison," I said finally. "I have to report what's happening." He nodded, as if he'd expected this, as if he'd already accounted for it. "I know," he said. "And you will, but not yet. Give me 2 weeks, Julia. 2 weeks where we're just us, where you're not a spy and I'm not a criminal, where there's nothing but this." He gestured between us, and the life we're building. "That's not how the world works," I whispered. "Then we'll make our own world," he said simply. "For 2 weeks, we'll make our own world." Before I could respond, before I could articulate all the reasons why this was insane, he leaned forward and kissed me again. Not like a claim this time, like a prayer, like a question he was terrified to know the answer to. And when he pulled away, leaving the room in silence, I realized something that would haunt me for the rest of the investigation. I was hoping he was right. I was hoping we could build a world where he wasn't what he was, and I wasn't what I was. I was hoping for something impossible, and wanting the impossible, I was learning, was the most dangerous thing of all. The first warning came on day 5. I was at Domenico's penthouse, a sprawling space on the 54th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows that made the city below look like a toy set. He'd moved me there the morning after our 2 a.m. conversation, and I'd stopped pretending to resist. My apartment building had been too exposed, too accessible to people who wanted to hurt me. At least that's what I told myself. The truth was simpler and far more dangerous. I wanted to be where he was. His world was nothing like I'd expected. Yes, there were men with guns standing in corners, watching everything. Yes, there were phone calls taken in hushed tones that ended with orders for things I didn't want to understand. But there were also quiet moments, mornings where he'd make me breakfast because I was nauseous, afternoons where he'd sit with his head in my lap while I ran my fingers through his hair, evenings where we'd watch the city lights and pretend we were normal people in a normal relationship. The recording device Morrison had given me sat unused in the bathroom, behind a loose tile. I hadn't reported in 6 days. Domenico was on a call in his study when Enzo appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. "We have a problem," the scarred man said without preamble. Vittorio's men were spotted near the warehouse in Red Hook. 3 of them, armed. My stomach twisted. "How close?" Domenico's voice came from the study, commanding, immediate. The transformation from the man who'd made me breakfast to the man who ran an empire happened in the space of a heartbeat. 2 blocks. They were photographing the exterior. I watched through the open doorway as Domenico ended his call and stood, already moving toward the weapons cabinet that had been hidden behind an oil painting. His movements were economical, practiced. The shirt he'd worn, soft gray linen that made his eyes darker, was replaced with tactical gear. "Increase security at all properties," he ordered, "and get Matteo to move the shipment from Red Hook to the Staten Island facility tonight. I don't care if it's faster, do it." He paused, then added quietly, "And send a message to my cousin. Tell him if he even looks at my interests again, I'll make sure he regrets being born." "Understood," Enzo said. He hesitated at the door. "What about her?" Domenico's gaze found me across the penthouse. Even from a distance, I could see the war happening behind his eyes, the part of him that wanted to protect me, warring with the part that wanted to use this situation to bind me to him irreversibly. "She stays close," he said finally. "With me. At all times." "Domenico? No." I started, but he was already moving toward me. "Non-negotiable," he said, his hand catching my elbow gently but with absolute firmness. "Vittorio knows about you now. Marcus made sure of that, which means you're a liability to him, a bargaining chip, leverage against me. Until I neutralize this threat, you don't leave my sight. You can't just keep me locked up." "I can. I will." He cupped my face, forcing me to meet his eyes. "And you'll let me, because your baby's life depends on it. Are we clear?" The coldness in his voice, so different from the tenderness I'd experienced, made something crystallize inside me. This was who he really was. The vulnerability I'd seen wasn't weakness or transformation. It was a calculated tool. I was being held, controlled, kept in a cage made of care and desire. But even as the thought formed, even as I should have felt outrage, I couldn't deny the truth. His ruthlessness was on my behalf. He was terrifying, but he was terrifying in service of my safety. That was somehow worse. "Clear," I whispered. Over the next 72 hours, the penthouse transformed into a fortress, armed men in every corridor. Security cameras that rotated through feeds on screens Domenico monitored obsessively. Phone calls that came in at 3 a.m., with updates on Vittorio's movements. The whole operation hummed with a dangerous, contained violence like a predator waiting to strike. And through it all, Domenico kept me close. He slept beside me but didn't touch me, and the lack of contact was somehow more intimate than sex would have been. His body curved around mine, protective and claiming. In the morning, before he'd disappear to meet with his lieutenants, he'd brush his lips against my shoulder, and I'd feel it like a brand. On the 4th night, Morrison called. I was in the bathroom, ostensibly alone, when my burner phone buzzed with a text. A single word, "Respond." My hands shook as I typed back, "Can't talk." Situation compromised. 3 seconds later, extraction in 48 hours. Pier 7, midnight. Come alone or operation is burned. I stared at the message, my heart hammering. 48 hours. That was all I had. 48 hours before I had to make a choice, before my 2 weeks with Domenico ran out and reality came crashing down, before I had to decide whether to betray him. "What's wrong?" I nearly dropped the phone. Domenico stood in the bathroom doorway, still shirtless from sleep, his expression sharp. He knew. Somehow, he always knew. "Nothing," I said, automatically. He moved toward me, his hand extending for the phone. "Give it to me." "Domenico." "The phone. Now." The command in his voice left no room for negotiation. This was the man who people obeyed, who'd built an empire on absolute authority. I had no leverage, no way to refuse. I handed him the burner phone. He read the messages, and something in his face shifted, hardened into something terrible and beautiful, and utterly ruthless. When he looked at me, I saw the moment he calculated what I'd done, how long I'd known, why I'd stopped reporting. "You were going to leave," he said, not a question. "They ordered an extraction." I didn't respond. "But you were going to." He set the phone down carefully on the counter, like handling something fragile that might detonate. "That was the plan, wasn't it? Stay here long enough to get good intelligence. Make me fall in love with you. Extract when I was too compromised to respond effectively." "That's not—" "Don't lie to me," he said, his voice dropping to something cold and cutting. "Not now, not after everything." The penthouse suddenly felt very small. "I never lied about what I feel," I said carefully. "I never lied about how you make me feel." But Morrison is right, I can't stay. I can't just disappear into your world and pretend the FBI doesn't exist. I have a duty. To the same government that sent you here pregnant and alone. His laugh was harsh. To men like Morrison, who see you as expendable? They're not your loyalty, Julia. They're your cage. He reached out and placed his hand on my stomach, where our daughter was moving. This is your loyalty. Her. Me. This family. Family? I pulled away from him. You've known about me for days. You've kept me here. Made me think I had choices when really I've been your prisoner the whole time. That's not family, Domenico. That's possession. Something flashed across his face. Pain, maybe. Or the realization that I'd finally seen him clearly. Yes, he said quietly. It is. Because I can't do this any other way. I can't love without owning. I can't protect without controlling. That's what I am. That's what they made me. He stepped closer, and his voice became desperate, raw. But I'm asking you to stay anyway. I'm asking you to choose me knowing exactly what I am. Stay. Give me the family I lost. Give me a reason to be better. 48 hours. I had 48 hours to decide whether to walk away from the man I was beginning to love, or walk away from everything I'd built my identity around. What happens if I try to leave? I asked. His expression closed off completely. Then I'll do whatever is necessary to stop you. And we both know what that means. He wasn't threatening me, exactly. But we both understood. There would be no mercy. There would be no escape. If I tried to leave, he would move heaven and earth to keep me, and collateral damage was merely an acceptable loss. I had 48 hours, and with each one that passed, I was less certain that leaving was what I actually wanted. I didn't sleep that night. Domenico had left me in the bedroom, not locked in, but with armed guards posted outside the doors. The distinction between freedom and imprisonment had become meaningless. I lay in the dark, one hand on my stomach, feeling my daughter move inside me like she was trying to escape too. 47 hours until extraction. My phone sat on the nightstand, dormant and terrifying. Morrison was waiting for a confirmation of my location. I could text him, still at Castellano penthouse, 54th floor, heavily armed security. I could give him everything he needed, but my fingers wouldn't move. Around 3 a.m., Domenico came to me. He was still wearing the tactical gear, and there was blood on his sleeve, not his own. I could tell by the way he moved without pain. He'd been somewhere, doing something, handling the Vittorio situation with the ruthlessness that was as much a part of him as the color of his eyes. He didn't say anything. He simply removed his clothes and slid into bed beside me, pulling me against him like I was the only thing in the world that could anchor him to humanity. Don't leave me, he said into my hair. It wasn't a command this time. It was a plea. Please don't leave me. I wanted to be stronger than this. I wanted to pull away, to tell him that his love was toxic, and his promises were lies wrapped in tenderness. But his heartbeat was racing beneath my ear, and his arms were shaking slightly, and I realized that whatever he'd done tonight, whoever he'd killed to protect his interests, it had cost him something. I'm here, I whispered. I'm still here. For how long? His grip tightened. How long before you remember who you're supposed to be? How long before duty wins? Maybe it already has, I said quietly. Maybe I'm already gone. He went rigid. I felt him pull back, studying my face in the darkness. Do you want to leave? The honest answer was, I don't know anymore. What I said was, I don't know how to stay. He was silent for a long moment. Then he rolled away from me, and the loss of his warmth felt like a physical wound. He got out of bed and went to the window, staring out at the city that belonged to him. Come here, he said finally. I should have refused. Should have stayed in bed, protected by distance. Instead, I got up, my pregnant body moving slowly across the cold floor, and went to him. He wrapped a robe around me, one of his, oversized and still warm from his body, and took my hand. I want to show you something, he said. We moved through the penthouse in silence, passing armed guards who averted their eyes. Domenico led me to a room I'd never seen before, a study, but not like the one where he conducted business. This one was intimate, personal. The walls were lined with photographs. This is my sister, he said, pointing to a framed photo of a dark-haired little girl with his eyes, laughing at something beyond the camera's frame. Elena. She was 5 when they took her. She wanted to be a dancer. There were more photos. Elena at different ages, frozen in moments that would never come to pass. A childhood documented and then stopped, preserved in amber. After she died, I built this empire. Domenico continued, his voice hollow. I made myself into something that couldn't be touched, couldn't be hurt, couldn't be threatened. And it worked. No one took anything from me again. He turned to face me. But I was building a prison, Julia. A beautiful, powerful prison. And I didn't realize until you walked into it that I was the only one locked inside. He guided me to a desk in the corner and opened a drawer. Inside were documents, official papers, photographs, what looked like adoption records. What is this? I asked. Insurance, he said. Proof. Years ago, I made arrangements with a woman in Naples. She has a daughter 3 years old. If anything ever happened to me, if I ever died, she would be brought here, to you. You would raise her as your own. She would have protection. She would have safety. He took my hand and placed it on the papers. And you would never be alone. Because I've seen what it's like to be a woman without resources, without protection, in a world that doesn't care. I won't let that be Elena's fate, and I won't let it be your daughter's fate either. Tears were streaming down my face. Domenico, that's insane? He smiled sadly. Yes, it is. It's the action of a man who loves you so completely that he's constructed contingencies for a future where he doesn't exist. That's how far gone I am. He moved closer, taking my face in his hands. So the question isn't whether I can let you go. The answer to that is no. I can't. I won't. I would burn the world down before I'd let you walk out of my life. But the real question is whether you want to go. Because if you don't, if you stay, not because you're afraid of what I'll do, but because you actually choose me, then we can be something other than captor and prisoner. How can I choose this? I whispered. How can I choose you, knowing what you are? The same way I chose you, he said. By loving something broken and dangerous and beautiful. By deciding that the risk is worth the reward. He kissed me then, and it was different from the other kisses. There was no claim in it, no demand. It was a question. Will you stay? I kissed him back, and it was an answer. I already have. When we pulled apart, he was undoing the robe, letting it fall to the floor. His hands were gentle on my swollen belly, reverent, almost. I want to make love to you, he said. Not own you, not claim you, just be with you. Let me do that. Let me love you the way you deserve. I should have said no. Should have remembered Morrison, remembered my duty, remembered the woman I'd been before Domenico Castellano walked into my life and destroyed my sense of who I was. Instead, I nodded. He lifted me carefully, cradling me like I was precious beyond measure, and carried me back to the bedroom. What happened next wasn't the violent passion of cinema. It was something slower, deeper, more intimate. His hands traced every inch of my body, not with possession, but with worship. He worshipped my swollen breasts, my stretched skin, the child growing inside me. He whispered apologies for every way his world had touched mine with violence. He whispered promises he probably couldn't keep. And when he was inside me, when we were connected in the most fundamental way, he looked into my eyes and said, "Stay, please stay. Not because I'll hurt you if you leave, but because I need you to, because I'm only human when you're with me." The pleasure built slowly, tenderly. It wasn't explosive. It was like dawn breaking gradual and absolute and inevitable. When I came undone completely, and he held me through it, whispering my name like it was a prayer. Afterward, as we lay tangled together, I felt him reach for my phone on the nightstand. I should have stopped him. Instead, I watched as he typed a message to Morrison. "Agent, your operative is remaining in the field. Any extraction attempts will be met with extreme prejudice. She is no longer yours. She belongs to me now. D." He deleted the message before sending it. "I'm not actually that cruel," he said softly. "But I needed you to understand what I'm capable of if you leave. That I'm not a man who accepts loss." I should have been horrified. Should have felt the violation of him going through my phone, the coercion of his threat. Instead, I felt something shift inside me. A surrender. A recognition that I had crossed a line and couldn't go back. 46 hours until extraction. And I had absolutely no intention of showing up. The call came at dawn. I woke to Domenico already dressed. Phone pressed to his ear, his jaw clenched tight enough to crack teeth. He was speaking rapid Italian too fast for me to follow, but the tone was unmistakable. Fury, betrayal. When he ended the call, he didn't look at me. "Get dressed," he said flatly. "We're leaving." "What happened?" "Marcus." His voice was ice. "My cousin Vittorio found him trying to sell information about my operations to the federal government. Not just your FBI file. Everything. Years of conversations, financial details, names of people in my organization. He was going to burn the entire family for $50,000 and witness protection. My stomach dropped. Where is he? Dead. Domenico said it like he was commenting on the weather. Vittorio took care of it. Marcus was dead. The man who'd abandoned me, who'd fathered my child, and then vanished into his own cowardice, he was gone. I should have felt something. Relief, maybe. Closure. But what I felt was cold, numb, because Domenico's detachment told me that killing Marcus was simply business, and I was learning that I'd become business too. And the information he was selling? I asked carefully. How much did he give them? His eyes finally found mine, and there was something terrible in them. Something that looked like the moment he was reconsidering everything. Enough, he said. Names, operations. Enough that the FBI will be moving forward with arrests within the week. The penthouse suddenly felt smaller. Domenico, pack a bag, he interrupted. We're going to the compound in upstate New York. Until this blows over. Until I figure out what's been compromised and what's salvageable. You stay there, with me. This is because of me, I said. It wasn't a question. He turned away. No. This is because Marcus was weak and desperate and wanted to save his own skin by selling everyone else's. But your involvement accelerated his timeline. He knew you were FBI. He thought he could use you as leverage. The realization hit me like a physical blow. He was going to sell me out, expose me. Yes. Domenico pulled a suitcase from the closet and began throwing clothes into it with mechanical precision, which means that when the FBI comes looking for their operative, they'll find out that she was already burned by her own asset, that her cover was blown 3 weeks ago, and she's been living in a known Mafia compound since then. They'll think I went native, I whispered. They'll think I turned. You did turn, he said simply, not at gunpoint, not under duress. You chose me, you skipped extraction, you made love to me knowing exactly what I am. From their perspective, you betrayed them. I moved to the window, looking out at the city as it woke up. Somewhere down there, Morrison was probably receiving reports. Somewhere in a federal building, people were realizing their operation had imploded. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a tiny voice that sounded like my old self was screaming. I need to think, I said. No, Domenico said, and his voice held that absolute finality. You need to pack. Thinking is a luxury you don't have anymore. He was right. I could feel the FBI closing in, not on him, but on me. The moment they confirmed that Marcus had sold my information, they would classify me as a security risk. I would be burned, isolated, cut off, and Domenico was my only option for survival, which was exactly where he wanted me. The drive to upstate New York took 5 hours. Domenico drove while I sat in the passenger seat, my hand on my stomach, trying to feel my daughter move. She was quieter today, as if she sensed the tension radiating from the man beside me. We didn't speak. The silence was crushing. Around mile marker 200, I finally broke it. Did you know? I asked. About Marcus trying to flip? I suspected, Domenico said, not taking his eyes off the road. Vittorio mentioned that Marcus had been making contact with federal agents. I should have had him killed immediately, but I didn't want to upset you. The irony was vicious. His mercy had created the catastrophe that now bound me to him completely. I'm not your responsibility, I said. He laughed a short, harsh sound. You're carrying my child. You live in my home. You've betrayed your government for me. You are entirely my responsibility. I'm not carrying your child. I'm carrying my child. The man who fathered her abandoned us both, and I'm offering to be better than he was, Domenico said. I'm offering to show your daughter what it means to be loved unconditionally, to be protected, to never doubt that she matters. By keeping her locked in a compound, the words came out sharper than I intended. By raising her in a world built on violence and crime, by raising her with a father who won't leave, he said coldly. By showing her that family means something, that loyalty means something, that you stay, even when things get difficult. The compound appeared an hour later, a sprawling estate surrounded by high walls and armed guards. It looked less like a home and more like a fortress, which, I suppose, it was. The interior was surprisingly beautiful. Rustic elegance, stone fireplaces, a kitchen that looked like it belonged in a 5-star restaurant. But beauty couldn't hide the truth. It was still a cage. Domenico showed me to a bedroom on the 2nd floor, airy, comfortable, with windows that overlooked the grounds. but the windows were reinforced. The doors had locks on both sides. "You can roam freely within the compound," he said. "But you don't leave. You don't contact anyone. You don't attempt to communicate with the outside world. Are we clear? And if I refuse?" His expression hardened. "Then I'll have to make choices I don't want to make. And your daughter will pay the price for your defiance." It was the first time he'd directly threatened the baby, and it shattered something inside me. "You said you weren't like this," I whispered. "You said you wanted to be better." "I am being better," he said. "I'm keeping you alive. I'm keeping her alive. In about 48 hours, the FBI is going to announce that they're looking for you. They're going to call you a person of interest in an ongoing investigation. They're going to put your picture everywhere. And when they do, the only place you'll be safe is here, with me, where Vittorio and every other rival family can't use you as leverage against me." "So I'm supposed to be grateful?" I said bitterly. "You're supposed to understand that you made a choice," he replied. "And now you're living with the consequences. You wanted to be in my world, Julia. Well, this is it. This is the reality beneath the seduction." He left me alone in the bedroom. I stood at the reinforced window, watching the guards patrol the perimeter, and realized something with crystalline clarity. I had never actually loved Domenico Castellano. What I'd loved was the version of him he'd created for me, the version with vulnerability and tenderness and the capacity for change. The real Domenico Castellano was a man who'd constructed an entire philosophy around control. He hadn't fallen in love with me. He'd acquired me, collected me, made me another piece of his empire. And now I was trapped. That night, as I lay in the fortress bedroom, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Julia, it's Agent Morrison. We know you're with Castellano. We can extract you safely. Reply with your location. You're not lost yet." My hands shook as I read it. All I had to do was reply, give them my coordinates, tell them I'd been coerced, manipulated, held against my will, which wasn't even a lie. I could be free, but freedom meant abandoning my daughter's father, meant raising her alone, in hiding, running from both the FBI and the criminal underworld, meant becoming the very thing I'd been trying to escape, a woman without protection, without resources, without anyone to stand beside her. I deleted the message without responding. And in that moment, I understood that Domenico had trapped me not with locks and guards, but with the same thing that had always trapped women like me, the illusion that I had nowhere else to go. The attack came 3 days after we arrived at the compound. I knew something was wrong the moment the power cut. The lights in the fortress bedroom flickered and died, leaving only the faint glow of dawn filtering through the reinforced windows. I heard the chaos before I understood it, shouting, gunfire, the sound of vehicles crashing through the front gates. Domenico appeared in my doorway less than a minute later, moving with the efficiency of a man transitioning into battle. "Stay here," he said, already turning away. "What's happening?" I grabbed his arm. "Vittorio." His voice was clipped, controlled. "He's made a move. Stay in this room. Lock the door. Don't come out, no matter what you hear. Domenico, promise me," he said. And for just a moment, the hardness cracked. There was fear there. Not for himself, but for me. For the child I was carrying. "Promise me you'll protect her. Promise me you'll stay alive." I nodded, unable to speak. He kissed my forehead and was gone. The gunfire intensified almost immediately. It wasn't distant, it was close. Too close. I could hear windows shattering, men screaming, the percussion of violence echoing through the compound. I moved to the window and saw armed figures in dark tactical gear moving across the grounds. But they weren't Domenico's men. They wore different insignia, different colors. Vittorio's family had come to war. I locked the bedroom door as instructed and sat on the bed, my hands cradled around my belly, whispering to my daughter, apologizing, promising her a better life than this, knowing, even as I promised, that I was lying. Then the bedroom door exploded inward. A man I didn't recognize stood in the doorway, assault rifle raised. He was younger, maybe 30, with scarred knuckles and eyes that looked utterly devoid of mercy. "You," he said in a voice that carried a Sicilian accent thick as blood. "You're Castellano's new whore. Vittorio wants you." My body went cold. "I'm pregnant. I'm not. I don't care." He moved toward me. "Your leverage. You're worth millions in negotiation. Move." I stood slowly, my mind racing. If Vittorio's men had penetrated this far into the compound, if they were moving freely through the corridors, that meant Domenico was losing. or already lost. The man grabbed my arm roughly, and I felt my baby kick in response to my spike in adrenaline. The protective instinct was instant and primal. I drove my elbow backward into his face. It was a clumsy move, born of desperation rather than training. But it caught him by surprise. His grip loosened for just a second, long enough for me to run. I made it 6 feet before his hand closed around my hair and yanked me backward. I fell hard onto my side, the impact driving the air from my lungs. Pain radiated through my hip, and I felt something shift inside me, a warning contraction. Too early, too violent. "You shouldn't have done that," he hissed, dragging me toward the door. The gunshot came from above me. I didn't see where it came from at first, just the sudden spray of blood across my face, the weight of the man's body going slack, his grip on my hair releasing as he collapsed beside me. Domenico stood in the doorway to my ensuite bathroom, a tactical pistol in his hand, and his face was something I'd never seen before. Not cold, not controlled, absolutely, utterly feral. He shot the man 3 more times in the head, each shot deliberate and final. Making sure, then he was beside me, pulling me up, checking me for injuries. "Are you hurt? Is she?" His hands were on my belly, my face, searching for damage. "I'm okay," I gasped. "I'm okay." He didn't. "Come on," he said, and his voice was hoarse, raw. "We need to move." He pulled me down the corridor at a run that my pregnant body couldn't sustain. I could barely keep up, my breath coming in panicked gasps, every step sending lightning through my hip where I'd fallen. The grand staircase was a war zone. Bodies were scattered across the marble, some in Domenico's colors, some in Vittorio's. The walls were stippled with bullet holes, and at the bottom of the stairs, Domenico's second-in-command, Enzo, was lying motionless in a pool of blood. Domenico's hand tightened on my wrist, but he didn't slow. We descended the stairs carefully, stepping over bodies, and I realized with horrifying clarity that this was real. This wasn't cinema or storytelling. These were dead men, men who'd had faces, histories, families, men who'd died in service to a war that meant nothing, that accomplished nothing except violence. The main floor was being held by Domenico's remaining men, maybe 6 of them, barricaded behind overturned furniture, returning fire toward the windows where Vittorio's soldiers were positioned. "Status," Domenico barked, and his voice held absolute authority even in the chaos. "We've lost the East Wing," one of the men shouted back. 20 of ours down, 30 of theirs confirmed. Vittorio's directing from outside. "We can hold here, but if he brings in the second wave..." "He won't get a second wave," Domenico said flatly. He looked down at me, at my terrified face, at the way I was holding my stomach. For just a moment, something almost like regret crossed his features. Then it hardened. "Take her to the safe room. The one beneath the wine cellar. Seal it. No matter what you hear, you don't come out until I send the signal. I'm not leaving you," I said. His eyes met mine, and in them I saw every version of Domenico I'd known. The wounded child who'd lost his sister, the ruthless businessman, the tenderness he'd shown me, and underneath it all, the darkness he couldn't escape no matter how hard he tried. "You're carrying my daughter," he said quietly. "You're the only thing in this world that matters to me, which means I need you alive, safe, and out of this." He pulled me close, kissing the top of my head with a desperation that felt like goodbye. "Go. Now." The safe room was accessed through the kitchen, down a narrow staircase into the wine cellar. One of Domenico's men, a young guy named Carlo, led me through the darkness, handed me a flashlight, and sealed the heavy steel door behind me. I was alone in a bunker, alone with my terror and my unborn daughter and the knowledge that the man I'd been trying to convince myself I didn't love was upstairs, facing down an army. For the next hour, I heard the violence, gunfire, explosions, screaming, the sounds of men dying, the sounds of Domenico Castellano fighting for his empire with a ruthlessness that was beautiful and terrible. And then, silence. I waited in the darkness for what felt like an eternity. Every second stretched into agony. My baby had stopped moving. I was having irregular contractions, the kind that weren't quite labor but weren't normal either. Stress contractions, fear contractions, the sounds of pregnancy and anguish. When the door finally opened, I flinched. But it was Domenico. He looked like he'd gone to war in hell and survived through sheer will. Blood covered him, some his own, most of it belonging to other people. His white shirt was torn, revealing a gash across his ribs that needed stitches. His left arm hung at an awkward angle, dislocated, probably, but his eyes were alive, burning with a kind of feverish intensity. "Are you hurt?" he asked immediately, moving toward me. "The baby," I gasped. "Something's wrong. I've been having contractions, and she's not moving, and—" He was already pulling out his phone, calling someone. "Dr. Santoro." "No, it's not a request. She's in labor. I don't care if you're busy. You come to the compound. You come now. And you deliver this baby safely. Or I will personally ensure that you spend the rest of your life wishing you'd never been born." He ended the call and pulled me against him. "You won then," I whispered into his blood-soaked chest. "Vittorio, he won't be a problem anymore," Domenico said flatly. "No one who moves against me will be a problem anymore." I didn't ask what that meant. I didn't want to know how many bodies were upstairs. I didn't want to know the extent of the destruction or the price he'd paid. I just held on to him and felt my daughter kick, weak but alive, reminding me that even in the darkness, there was still life, still possibility, still hope, even if it was built on corpses. The labor lasted 18 hours. Dr. Santoro arrived within an hour of Domenico's call, along with a full medical team and enough equipment to make my bedroom look like a private surgical suite. But no amount of medical preparation could have made me ready for the pain. Domenico was with me through all of it. I won't romanticize labor. It wasn't beautiful. It wasn't transformative in the way people pretend. It was brutal, primal agony that made me question every choice that had led to this moment. It made me rage at Marcus for leaving me. It made me rage at Morrison for recruiting me. It made me rage at myself for being so desperate for love that I'd walked into a mafia boss's world like it was sanctuary. But through the 18 hours, Domenico never left. He held my hand while contractions tore through me. He wiped sweat from my forehead with a tenderness that felt obscene given the blood on his hands. He whispered to the baby, his daughter, our daughter, promising her a world that would never exist. Promising her safety. Promising her that he would be better than his own father had been. And at 4:37 a.m., our daughter was born. She was small, coming 6 weeks early, and she was screaming. Perfect, healthy lungs, Dr. Santoro assured us, but screaming like the world had betrayed her, like she understood, even in her newborn clarity, that she'd been born into a war zone. They placed her on my chest, and I felt something break open inside me that I'd been holding closed for months. Domenico was crying. I'd never seen him cry before. Not in rage, not in passion, not in the quiet moments where I'd imagined vulnerability. But he was crying as he looked at his daughter. Our daughter and I realized that this was the moment where everything became irrevocable. This was the moment where we were no longer just two people making terrible choices. We were three. "She's perfect," he whispered, touching her impossibly small face with one finger. "She's perfect." For the next 3 days, I barely slept. The compound had been cleaned meticulously, all evidence of the battle removed. But I could feel the ghost of it, could see the way the walls had been repaired, the new furniture brought in to replace what had been destroyed. They'd erased the violence, painted over the bullet holes, and replaced the dead men with new guards. It was obscene. Domenico hired a nanny, an older woman named Rosa who'd apparently worked for his family for 20 years, but he didn't let her do much. He wanted to care for the baby himself, wanted to change her diapers, hold her while she slept, whisper to her in Italian about the legacy he was building for her. And I watched him with my daughter, and I felt something like grief. Because he was going to be a good father. That was the cruelest part. He was going to love her fiercely, and protect her absolutely, and give her everything except freedom. She would grow up in luxury, surrounded by safety, and trapped within walls she didn't build. She would become like me. On the 4th day, the FBI came, not to rescue me, to negotiate. I didn't know this until Domenico came to find me in the nursery, where I was sitting in a rocking chair, watching my daughter sleep. She was so small, so impossibly fragile. "Agent Morrison is at the gates," he said quietly. "He wants to speak with you." My entire body went rigid. What does he want? I don't know, but I suspect he wants to make a final attempt at extracting you. Domenico sat on the edge of the crib, staring at our daughter. "You can speak with him, on the condition that I'm present. Domenico, non-negotiable," he said, and there was that absolute finality in his voice. "You want to talk to him? You talk to him with me there? That's the only option." I should have felt a flash of resistance. Should have felt something rebel against the control. But I was so tired. My body ached. My breasts were sore from nursing. I was bleeding, hormonal, and emotionally shattered. The thought of facing Morrison, of having to defend my choices, of having to explain why I'd burned the operation and run to the arms of my target felt impossibly difficult. "Okay," I whispered. "Okay." Morrison was waiting in Domenico's study. He looked older than I remembered, or maybe I'd just never really seen him before. He was a middle-aged man in a suit that cost money, but didn't make him look powerful the way Domenico's suits did. He was simply a bureaucrat, a man enforcing rules on behalf of an institution that saw me as expendable. "Julia," he said, standing when we entered. He looked at Domenico with barely concealed contempt. "You look well." "The baby?" "Healthy," I said flatly. "A girl." "Congratulations." His tone suggested he meant the opposite. "I won't pretend this isn't a disaster. Your cover was compromised weeks ago. You've burned the entire operation. You've destroyed years of intelligence work. And you've done it all because you fell in love with a criminal." "I fell in love with a man," I corrected quietly, "who happens to be a criminal. But yes, that man is responsible for at least 50 confirmed murders," Morrison said. "That's just the ones we can prove. He traffics in narcotics, illegal weapons, human trafficking." "I know what he is," I interrupted. "You don't need to remind me." "Do I?" Morrison moved closer to me, ignoring Domenico's sudden shift in posture, a warning. "Because, from where I'm standing, it looks like you've convinced yourself that love excuses his crimes, that somehow, because he treats you well, the violence doesn't matter." "The violence matters," I said coldly. "I've seen it. I've lived in it. I know exactly what he is. And I'm still here, because the alternative is worse." "The alternative is freedom," Morrison said. "It's a new identity, a new life. It's your daughter growing up somewhere safe, away from this world." Domenico laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Your safe houses have been compromised by Russian oligarchs. Your witness protection program is penetrated by at least 3 different criminal organizations. You're offering her the illusion of safety, not actual protection." He stepped forward, positioning himself between me and Morrison. "And you're offering it because you need her as a witness. Because without her testimony, your case against me crumbles. You don't care about her welfare. You care about your conviction rate." "That's not true," Morrison said, but his jaw was tight. He knew Domenico was right. "You can make whatever offer you want," Domenico continued. "And she can make whatever choice she wants. But let's be honest about what those choices are. You're offering a woman with a newborn daughter a life on the run, constantly looking over her shoulder, waiting for someone to find her. I'm offering her safety, stability, the resources to raise her properly, built on blood money," Morrison said. "Yes," Domenico agreed simply. "Built on blood money. At least I'm honest about it." I stood between them, feeling the weight of impossible choices press down on me. "I can't," I said finally, looking at Morrison. "I can't testify against him. I can't do it." "Julia, I'm in love with him," I said, and the words felt like poison and honey simultaneously. "I'm in love with a man who's incapable of changing, who will never be anything but what he is, and I'm staying with him anyway because I have a daughter now. And she needs stability more than I need redemption." Morrison's face hardened. "Then you're complicit. Everything he does from this moment forward is on you." "I know," I whispered. He left without another word, and I watched him go, and I felt something inside me die. The woman who'd been an FBI operative, who'd believed in justice and the rule of law, and the possibility of making the world safer, that woman was gone. What remained was a mother. Nothing more, nothing less. That night, after the baby was sleeping, I locked myself in the bathroom and fell apart completely. I sat on the marble floor and cried, not quietly, not with dignity, but with the raw, gasping sobs of someone who just realized she'd made a choice she couldn't undo. I cried for the woman I'd been, for the future I'd sacrificed, for the daughter sleeping in the next room who would grow up knowing nothing but this world. Domenico found me there. He sat beside me on the floor, and he didn't try to comfort me. He just sat with me in the darkness and let me fall apart. "I'm sorry," I said finally. "I'm sorry I'm not stronger than this." "You're the strongest person I know," he said quietly. "You chose me knowing exactly what I am. That takes more strength than running ever would have." "I didn't choose you," I said bitterly. "I chose my daughter. I chose to protect her. And you knew that. You used that against me." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Yes, I did. And I would do it again. Because our daughter deserves the best life I can provide. And that life includes her mother being safe, protected, And with me. This isn't love, Domenico. This is captivity with better furnishings. Maybe, he said. Or maybe love just looks different when it's real. Maybe it looks like someone choosing your survival over their freedom. Maybe it looks like someone willing to become complicit in your crimes because the alternative is losing you. He reached out and pulled me against him, and I was too tired to resist. I had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. I had a daughter now. I had responsibilities that superseded my own needs. I had a man who loved me with a completeness that was indistinguishable from possession, and there was no going back. 2 weeks after our daughter was born, we named her Elena. It was Domenico's choice, and I didn't argue. Our daughter was his sister's namesake, the child who'd been murdered to make him powerful, immortalized in his empire's founding violence. When he placed the name on her like a crown, I understood that he wasn't just claiming her as his child. He was making her a monument to the trauma that had built his soul. She was beautiful, fierce. She cried with the authority of someone who'd been born to rule, and she was the reason the Russians came. I didn't understand the politics of it at first. There was a call encrypted, tense, where Domenico listened for a long time without speaking. When he ended it, his entire body had gone rigid. What happened? I asked from the rocking chair where I was nursing Elena. The Orlov family, he said flatly. They've decided to move into my territory. Not through violence, through acquisition. What does that mean? It means they've bought 3 members of my inner circle. It means they know about the warehouse locations, the shipping routes, the safe houses. His hand clenched into a fist. It means they know about you and Elena. My grip tightened on our daughter, and she made a small noise of protest. They're threatening us? I whispered. No, he said, and something terrible moved across his face. They're threatening me through you. They're saying that unless I cede control of my East Coast operations, they'll take you. They're saying that Elena would be worth millions on the black market, that trafficking a mafia boss's daughter would make them a legend. The words sounded like they were coming from very far away. You have to give them what they want, I said immediately. Whatever they want, you give them. The territory, the operations, everything. It doesn't matter. You give them everything. If I do that, I lose my power base entirely, Domenico said. I become nothing. And the moment I'm nothing, every other family circles. They take what remains. They hunt us. They find you and Elena, and... He didn't finish. He didn't need to. So what do we do? I asked, and I hated how small my voice sounded, how helpless. We run, he said quietly. Not far, not permanently, just far enough to be unpredictable. I have a property in upstate Vermont, remote, secure. We take Elena and disappear there, while I handle the Orlov situation. Handle how? I knew I didn't want to know the answer. I asked anyway. However necessary, he said. The property in Vermont was a cabin, though calling it that was like calling the Louvre a house. It was a massive lodge set into the mountains, accessible only by a private road that was guarded by men in tactical gear. Domenico had apparently built it years ago for situations exactly like this, a bolt hole when the Empire came under siege. We arrived at 2 a.m., and I was too terrified to feel the scenery. Elena was fussy from the travel, from being away from her familiar environment, from the tension radiating off her parents. I spent the first night walking her through the darkened house, singing lullabies, trying to convince both of us that we would survive this. Domenico disappeared into a study and didn't emerge for 16 hours. When he did, he looked like he'd been to war again, not physical warfare, but something psychological. His eyes were sunken. His hands shook slightly when he reached for water. He kissed Elena's forehead, and then mine, and I could taste the exhaustion on his lips. It's handled, he said. I didn't ask what it meant. I was learning that sometimes ignorance was merciful, but 3 days later, the television news showed the wreckage of what had been the Orlov family's primary warehouse in Brooklyn. There were no survivors. The death toll was in the hundreds: workers, security, family members. It was a massacre. Domenico sat and watched the news coverage with an expression of absolute blankness, and I realized that this was the price of his love for us. This was what keeping Elena safe looked like. Hundreds of bodies, families destroyed. An entire operation obliterated to send a message. They took you, he said quietly, not looking at me. They threatened Elena. I gave them a response that's unmistakable. Domenico, the deaths would have been worse if I'd shown mercy, he interrupted. If I'd negotiated or compromised, it would have been a sign of weakness. Every family from here to Sicily would have moved against me. Elena would have never been safe. You would have never been safe. I sat with Elena nursing at my breast, my daughter innocent and perfect and doomed to grow up in this world. And I felt something crystallize inside me. This was the truth beneath the romance. This was what loving a mafia boss actually meant. It meant loving someone capable of genocide in service of protecting what was his. It meant understanding that every moment of tenderness he showed us was built on mountains of corpses, and it meant accepting it anyway, because the alternative was putting Elena in danger. That night, after Elena was sleeping, Domenico made love to me with a desperation that bordered on violence. It wasn't gentle. It was a man claiming what was his, affirming that she still existed, that they still existed, that he hadn't destroyed everything by choosing to protect them. His hands were almost rough, his movements urgent and primal, and I met him with equal intensity, because in that moment, we weren't enemies or captor and captive. We were two people clinging to each other in the face of apocalypse. When it was over, we lay tangled together, and he whispered against my skin, "I know what I am. I know what I've done, and I know that every choice I make to keep you alive is a choice to let people die. But I would do it 1,000 times over. I would end the world to keep you safe." "I know," I said, and I meant it. That was the moment I stopped fighting it, not because I'd fallen in love with who he was, but because I'd accepted who he was, and decided that survival and protection mattered more than moral purity. I'd made the same choice that anyone would make, faced with impossible circumstances. I'd chosen my child's safety over the abstract concept of justice. The FBI didn't find us in Vermont, but Domenico knew they were looking. He knew Morrison was pushing for arrests, that warrants were being filed, that the federal government was building a case. He also knew that he was untouchable as long as he stayed hidden in the mountains with his wife and daughter. For 6 weeks, we lived a strange kind of peace. I would wake up, nurse Elena, watch her discover her own hands, and the world around her. Domenico would work from the study, making calls, conducting business, handling the empire through encrypted phones and intermediaries. Rosa the nanny would prepare meals. Sunlight would filter through the windows, and for moments, it felt almost normal. Then Domenico got the call that changed everything. I heard the shift in his voice before I understood the words. It was a call in Italian, rapid and heated, and when he ended it, he went very still. "What happened?" I asked, though I could already see the answer forming in his face. "They took Matteo," he said. "The FBI. They arrested him at his daughter's soccer game." My stomach dropped. Matteo was Domenico's oldest friend, the man who'd been with him since childhood. "They're using him," Domenico continued, "offering him a deal. He flips, testifies. He gets a reduced sentence. His daughter gets placed in protective custody. Are you saying he might?" "He might," Domenico said flatly. "He might betray me to protect his family. Which I would do, which you did when the moment came." There was no accusation in his voice, just truth. "So, what do you do?" I whispered. He was quiet for a long moment. "I eliminate the threat." "Domenico, no. He's your friend. He's going to decide whether his loyalty to me is stronger than his love for his daughter," Domenico said coldly. "And if he chooses his daughter over our friendship, then he's made his choice. And I make mine." He didn't ask my permission. He didn't need to. He walked into the study, made 2 phone calls, and when he emerged, I knew that Matteo was dead, not by his hand, but by his order, by the power he wielded through other people's willingness to murder in his name. I watched my daughter sleep in her bassinet, her perfect face peaceful and innocent, and I whispered to her, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I brought you into this world." Morrison found me at the grocery store in the small Vermont town near the compound. I didn't even recognize him at first. He looked different out of the federal office, older, defeated, like a man who'd been fighting a war he'd already lost. He simply appeared beside me in the produce section, holding an apple like he was shopping, and whispered, "5 minutes. Coffee shop across the street. Come alone or I walk away and never contact you again." I should have told Domenico immediately, should have had Morrison arrested, or worse. Instead, I agreed. The coffee shop was empty, except for an elderly couple in the corner. Morrison ordered 2 coffees and sat across from me, and I could see the desperation in every line of his face. "The case is collapsing," he said without preamble. "Matteo's dead. Castellano's other associates are either dead or too terrified to testify. Without inside testimony, we have nothing. No conviction, no leverage. He's going to walk away from every crime we've documented." "Good," I said flatly. "Julia, I mean it," I interrupted. I don't care about your case anymore. I don't care about justice or the rule of law. I care about my daughter being safe. And the only way she's safe is if Domenico remains untouchable." Morrison stared at me like he was trying to see the woman he'd recruited all those months ago. "Do you hear yourself? Do you understand what you've become?" "A mother," I said. "That's all I've become. A mother willing to do anything to protect her child. Even stay with a man who's murdered hundreds of people? Especially then," I said, "because he's the one person in this world with the power to protect her from the people who would use her to get to him." Morrison set down his coffee carefully. "There's another option. One I didn't think you'd consider. But I'm offering it now because I think you're drowning and you don't even realize it." "What option?" "Witness relocation," he said. "Genuine relocation. Not the compromise program we discussed before. This would be international. We move you and Elena to somewhere the Castellano name means nothing. New identities, new lives, complete severance." My heart stopped. "And Domenico?" "Faces trial, likely conviction, imprisonment for the rest of his life." "Then the answer is no. He would do it for you," Morrison said quietly. "If you asked him to leave, to disappear, to give up his empire, he would, because he loves you more than he loves his own life." I thought about that. Thought about Domenico's single-minded obsession with power, his inability to love without possessing, his complete incapacity for compromise or mercy, and I realized Morrison was wrong. "No, he wouldn't," I said. "Because he can't. His need for power isn't a choice anymore. It's not even about protecting us. It's about proving that he can never be vulnerable again. Domenico would choose his empire over me every time, and we both know it." "Then you're truly trapped," Morrison said. "Yes," I agreed. "But not by him, by circumstance, by the world, by the same system. You represent a system that would destroy my daughter if I tried to leave." He left the coffee shop after that, and I knew he wouldn't contact me again. When I returned to the compound, Domenico was waiting. He didn't ask where I'd been. He'd had me followed, of course he had. He knew about Morrison, knew what offer had been made, knew that I'd refused it. "You could have left," he said simply. We were in the study, the door closed, Elena sleeping in the next room. "You had an exit, a way out." "I know. Why didn't you take it?" I sat down slowly, feeling the exhaustion of months of a lifetime settle into my bones. "Because I'm in love with you. Not the version of you that exists in my head. Not the man you pretend to be in private moments. I'm in love with you the way you actually are. The ruthlessness, the cruelty, the absolute inability to compromise. I'm in love with the man who would burn the world down to protect his daughter." Something flickered across his face. Pain, maybe, or recognition. "That's not love," he said hoarsely. "That's insanity." "Maybe," I agreed. "But it's real, and it's mine, and I'm choosing it." He moved toward me, and for a moment I thought he might strike me. Instead, he pulled me against him, his entire body shaking. "I want to be better," he said into my hair. "I want to be the man you pretend I can be. I want to give Elena a father who's more than just power and fear and violence, but I don't know how. I don't know how to be anything else." "I know," I whispered. "That's why I'm staying." The FBI raid came 3 days later. Not on the compound, they couldn't get through the security, but coordinated strikes on Domenico's operations across the Northeast. Warehouses raided, money seized, associates arrested. It was Morrison's last attempt, his final play. If he couldn't convict Domenico, he could at least cripple him. I watched Domenico receive the reports, and I saw the moment his world began to crumble. Not violently, not dramatically, just a slow realization that the walls were closing in, that his power was being methodically dismantled, that even he couldn't control everything. Elena started crying, some primal infant sense that her father's stress was affecting the atmosphere around her. I picked her up and held her, and Domenico watched us like we were the last thing keeping him tethered to his humanity. "We could run," he said. It was the first time I'd heard something like desperation in his voice. "We could disappear. South America. Maybe. Somewhere far enough that the FBI can't touch us." "And your empire?" I asked. "Gone," he said flatly. "Dismantled. But you'd be safe. Elena would be safe. Isn't that all that matters?" I looked at him, really looked at him, and I saw the truth beneath the question. He wasn't offering to run because he wanted to. He was offering because he thought it's what I wanted, because somewhere in the depths of his darkness, he'd developed the capacity to want something other than power. "No," I said. "We stay and we fight. We stay and we rebuild. We stay and we prove that they can't break you." He laughed a broken sound. "You want me to stay and fight for a man who's a monster?" "I want you to stay and fight for the man you're trying to become," I said. "For the father Elena deserves. For the person you are when you're with us." Over the next 6 months, Domenico rebuilt. It was slower this time, more careful. He consolidated what remained, eliminated weakness in his organization, and carefully, methodically, restored his power. The FBI couldn't touch him, because he'd learned to be even more invisible than before. No digital footprints, no paper trails, just the whispered word of a man who remained untouchable despite everything they threw at him. And through it all, Elena grew. She was 8 months old when she smiled at her father for the first time. And when Domenico held her and felt her grip his finger with her impossibly small hand, something in him shifted. Not redemption, I was no longer naive enough to believe in redemption. But acceptance, maybe. An acknowledgement that he couldn't be the man he wanted to be, but he could be the man his daughter needed. We were sitting on the Vermont house's back porch one evening, Domenico holding Elena, me wrapped in a blanket against the autumn chill, when he said, "I'm going to make her different from me." "How?" I asked. "I don't know yet," he admitted. "But she's going to have choices. She's going to have the option to walk away from this world. I'm going to build her an empire, but I'm going to build her an exit strategy too, so that if she wants to leave, if she wants to be something other than what I am, she can." I looked at our daughter in his arms, and I felt something like hope. Not redemption for what we'd done, not absolution for the complicity we'd chosen, but the possibility that the next generation might be different, might be free in ways we could never be. "Do you regret it?" he asked, reading my silence. "Do you regret choosing me?" I thought about Morrison's offer, the FBI relocation, the chance at a normal life in some anonymous suburb with an assumed name. I thought about the woman I'd been before Domenico Castellano walked into my life, offering danger wrapped in tenderness. And I thought about the version of myself I'd become: complicit, compromised, trapped, but also seen, known, loved with an intensity that bordered on obsession. "No," I said. "I don't regret it. Even knowing that this world will always be dangerous, that Elena will grow up understanding violence in a way most children never will? Yes," I said, "because she'll grow up with a father who loves her absolutely. And that matters more than safety. It matters more than normalcy. It matters more than the life I gave up." Domenico pulled me close, cradling Elena between us, and for a moment we were just a family. Not a mafia boss and his captive, not a federal operative turned criminal, just 3 people trying to find something like happiness in the wreckage of impossible choices. The sun set over the Vermont mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, and I realized that this was the end of our story. Not a conclusion where everyone walks away redeemed, not a resolution where love conquers darkness and evil is defeated, just acceptance, complicity, the quiet understanding that we'd both chosen this path, and we would walk it together, consequences be damned. Elena fell asleep between us, her small fist wrapped around Domenico's shirt, and he kissed the top of her head with a tenderness that broke my heart all over again. "She'll be better than us," he whispered. "I hope so," I replied. And in the gathering darkness, with the man I loved holding the daughter we'd created from chaos and desperation, I understood that sometimes love isn't about saving someone. Sometimes it's about drowning together and calling it swimming. Sometimes it's about building a life on foundations of blood and betrayal and learning to call that home. Sometimes it's about accepting that you can't change the world, so you build your own world within it, and you protect it with every weapon at your disposal, including your own heart. The FBI would keep coming. The criminal underworld would keep circling. Elena would grow up in luxury and danger, privilege and prison. But for tonight, we were safe in the Vermont darkness, and that was enough. It had to be enough. Because love, I'd learned, wasn't about happily ever after. It was about choosing each other, again and again. Even when choosing each other meant sacrificing everything else. Even when it meant becoming someone you never thought you'd be. Even when it meant admitting that some prisons feel like home,